the subway the other day, normal commute, nothing special, headphones in, half paying attention, when I saw something that made me stop. It was a sign, and it said, "Make your best baby." Make your best baby? That's interesting, I thought, because have a healthy baby, I understand. But best got me thinking. And I imagined that I had gone to a fertility clinic. And instead of being asked, "Would you like a healthy baby?" I was asked, "Do you want a tall baby, a short baby, a blonde baby, a brunette baby? How about a baby with a low risk for depression?" Now, this may seem like science fiction, but it's not. These are real promises made possible by advances in IVF, genetic sequencing, and embryo screening. For those of you who don't know, IVF is the fertilization of an egg with sperm in a lab. Now, traditionally, IVF and embryos are screened primarily for serious genetic conditions like Tay-Sachs or cystic fibrosis. But what's emerging now goes far beyond disease prevention. Companies recently have been offering parents the ability to analyze embryos, not just for single gene disorders, but for complex traits. These traits are predicted using polygenic risk scores. A mouthful, I know, but they're basically an estimate of the probability a child has of developing certain conditions, like heart disease, diabetes, or even depression. Now, in theory, you could rank embryos by their predicted success. And in theory, you could choose the ones statistically most likely to thrive. And in marketing language, that becomes, "Make your best baby." But here's a question. Who defines best? Historically, reproductive technology aimed to prevent suffering. Very few people would argue against preventing fatal childhood illness. But polygenic selection moves us into a different territory. We're no longer asking, can we prevent disease? We're asking, can we optimize outcomes? Lower risk of schizophrenia, higher projected IQ. When embryos become optimization, when reproduction becomes optimization, children risk becoming projects, products, investments. Does that make everybody in here a little uncomfortable? It makes me a little uncomfortable. Though I will admit, polygenic risk scores are not destiny. They are estimates, probabilities based on population data. Parenting matters, culture matters, environment still matters. Yet marketing language can blur that nuance. Best baby implies control, certainty, guarantee. But what happens when that carefully selected embryo grows up and struggles? What happens when the lowest risk for depression baby develops depression anyways? What happens when a child realizes it was chosen over its siblings because of a predicted IQ score? The psychological implications are enormous, and not just for the child, but for parents as well. We may unintentionally shift parenting from unconditional acceptance to conditional expectation, from "I love you because you are mine" to "I chose you because you ranked highest." That's not just medical, that's existential. IVF is also quite expensive. So if embryo optimization becomes normalized, who is it that stands to benefit? Likely wealthier families, families who can afford IVF, who can afford repeated cycles. And so we risk creating a feedback loop. Wealthy families choose embryos most likely to succeed and thrive. Those children grow up with both genetic and environmental privilege. The gap widens. Now, this reminds me of a science fiction movie called Gattaca, in which genetic desirability determines your worth, and those conceived naturally are labeled invalid. We may think we're far from this future, but dystopias rarely arrive dramatically. They arrive incrementally, through choices, through convenience, and through marketing slogans that feel empowering. The phrase "have your best baby" sounds very loving, but it also carries a lot of warnings. And parents who choose not to use technologies may also feel pressured. If selecting for cognitive advancement becomes normalized, parents who do not want this for their children, will they be demonized? Because when enhancement is framed as prevention, refusal begins to look like negligence. And that does change things. That changes freedom. See, my brother has celiac disease, which basically means he can't have gluten. You know, bread, pasta, cake, all the good stuff. And gluten-free food is very expensive. Think same box, same product, you know, triple the price and half the taste. Yet, if you ask me, if you ask my parents, my brother is a gift. When embryos become rankings, children no longer become gifts. They become expectations. Now, companies may argue they are simply providing information. But information does not exist in a vacuum. Information shapes desire. Desire shapes norms. Norms shape society. And once society collectively agrees on what best looks like, diversity can quietly shrink. Neurodiversity, physical diversity, temperamental diversity. The phrase "have your best baby" sounds uplifting. And as I said before, it carries a quiet warning. For those of us who aren't careful, it may mean that we can make children who don't have bad traits and have only the good traits that we choose. And so, at its core, this debate is not just about IVF. It's about how we define human worth. Is worth statistical? Is it optimized? Or is it inherent? And the problem is not technology, rather, it's when the mystery of being human is flattened into test scores. And while we shouldn't reject scientific progress outright, we can ask questions. We can demand transparency about what polygenic risk scores can and cannot do. We can create ethical guardrails. We can regulate marketing language that overpromises certainty. Because technology is not the issue here. It's that we risk creating a more divided, less compassionate world. And as I said before, have your best baby sounds like a great idea. Loving, uplifting, hopeful. But if we're not careful, it can lead to a worse future for us all. And the future of reproduction is being shaped right now. And the question is, will it be shaped by empathy or by logic? Because the dystopia we fear doesn't begin with villains. It may begin with a promise. Make your best baby. Thank you.